You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 312 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Returning to the show, I believe the fourth time now, is the great Scott Horton. He is the author of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, the editorial director at antiwar.com, and the managing editor of Libertarian Institute, where is, of course, where you can find all my work, the Daily News Roundup and my podcast here, Foreign Policy Focus. So, Scott, welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming back on.
Hell yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for being part of the Institute, man. You're one of the best things we got going there.
Oh, well, thanks so much for that. And
I get complimented all the time on your work, so.
Oh, thanks. That's great to hear. And, I do have a lot of people I talk to that really like the Institute. So, thanks for giving myself and so many other people like a platform. Adam Graham, I think, is somebody you've published a couple times recently. He's been a friend of mine for a while.
His newest one about Remember the Maine and all the different, misinterpreted casus bellis, try to be nice about it. All the ways they've lied us in a war the last 100 years. I mean, that is 4-star quality work right there. It's at the top of the page right now. Yeah, I sure like that guy. I like anybody who can write that well and who knows that much.
Yeah, he's great. He's actually one of the guys in my private Facebook group. So, and everybody needs to check out, by the way, while we're talking about your private Reddit group, which is awesome. And I love actually the structure of the Reddit group over the Facebook groups, especially for like discussing the foreign policy stuff. So, everybody donate to Scott and then you get the keys to that group. For today's show, I said I think this might be a little bit of a longer one because there's a lot of things going on right now with the empire that I think with your like kind of history and knowledge is really going to help everybody to understand what the hell is actually going on. So first up on the slate today is Venezuela. You've done a bunch of interviews, and I'll link to them in the show notes page. Matt's Blumenthal, Greg Palast, and then this most recent one with Tom Eddlem, where he gives a little bit of a different take. So I was just wondering, kind of from all the interviews you've done and everything you read, what's your take on what's actually going on there? Is this a popular uprising? How much of it is driven by the United States? And how much of a tyrant is Maduro?
Well, so he seems like he's pretty illegitimate. Yes, there is some kind of popular uprising, but that doesn't negate the reality of the American intervention there, as you say. It's the same sort of situation we see with Syria or a lot of other places where, there are political disputes. There are political factions at each other's throats. But once America comes and decides to start picking winners and losers, well, now we're not talking about a domestic insurrection or a domestic, if assuming it's nonviolent, just a domestic, peaceful political grouping and their activities. You're seeing essentially puppets of the United States. And that's part of just being from a small, weak country in a world run by the American empire. And so, in other words, the right can be completely right about the illegitimacy of Maduro's recent re-election, about his mismanaging of the economy, etc. And then the leftists could be completely right that this is American intervention at play here. And that's the most important part to describe of the current situation taking place on the right. And I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, the Wall Street Journal version, the TV version, is that Mike Pence, the vice president of the United States, told this guy, Guaido, to go ahead and declare himself the president. The Constitution says that he could do that if the president is unavailable. And so they're saying, well, since he wasn't legitimately reelected, then the presidency is empty. And so he's unavailable. And so, this is the kind of thing where it's all interpretation. And certainly it's up to the Venezuelans to interpret how the Constitution is to be read and how it's to be applied there. funnily enough, I read a thing. I forget if it was at the Federalist or something, but it was definitely the pro-right-wing take there and the pro-Guaido take, and saying that he had every right to assume the presidency because this is the language, and the language is clear enough that it can be used according in the judgment of this American and whatever. And then, but it also says that he has to hold elections immediately. And then the writer says, but though, there are some Venezuelan experts who are saying that there's a lot of real wiggle room in that, and that in fact he doesn't have to hold elections for a long time, just as soon as he can, as long as it's reasonable or something. But it doesn't say that. So you have Americans, interpreting the Venezuelan constitution in order to excuse this coup when, it's clearly outside of their jurisdiction. And I'll go to show you that. I forget which article it is. I guess I should have this memorized. But the U.S. Constitution, and I think Article 4 or Article 5, is it Article 5 that's the restrictions on the state's powers? I think it's Article 5. It says that the national government shall have the right to guarantee a Republican form of government, the authority, the power, to guarantee a Republican form of government to any state in the Union. In other words, you must have an independent judiciary. You must have at least a unicameral legislature with regular elections and a state constitution and a rule of law, or the U.S. government has the right to do a regime change in your state in the Union that signed the Constitution of 1787. It doesn't say anything at all about regime change anywhere in the world where the boys in power in Washington, D.C. don't like them. And so there's your comparison and your contrast right there of what's in the legitimate jurisdiction of the United States and what's anybody else's business. As far as the elections, I mean, it really looks like, and I think Tom Eddlem did a good job of explaining this, that, Maduro, he didn't think he could win, or he was worried he couldn't win. So he abolished the House of Representatives, essentially, the National Assembly, and created a new one and stacked it with all his own guys. Now, the other side of the story is, well, the National Assembly was full of a bunch of American CIA puppets or something like that, so he had to do what he had to do. That may be true. It may not. I don't know. Then they held an election, and the opposition boycotted him. And it turns out, as Ted Snyder showed in an article that we ran at antiwar.com, the Americans, the USAians, told them to boycott the election. They interfered. Now, maybe they could have won the election if they hadn't, but instead they wanted a talking point, and maybe they couldn't have. But they wanted a talking point that the election was illegitimate because look at how low the turnout was. Well, the turnout was low because the right boycotted it. And in fact, one of their guys ran anyway, but just did really poorly because the rest of the team boycotted it. And that's the other part of the story here, is how fractious the opposition is. Some of them are leftist, some of them are rightist. It's a coalition of quite a few different groups, and they haven't been able to get their act together and solidify behind even a few candidates. They've had they're all spread out, and so have been unable to really mount an effective opposition. As far as the economy goes, I don't think there's any argument. I mean, Greg Palast, who certainly, he's a journalist, so he, professionally speaking, does not take sides, but you can tell he's very sympathetic to Hugo Chavez and all of that. He was happy to say that Maduro ran the thing into the ground. Oil prices crashed, but the promises to the people of Venezuela, the poor of Venezuela, by the central government, were not rescinded at all. If anything, they were expanded. So he ran up a huge debt, and then when he couldn't borrow any more money, he printed the rest and debased the currency, and then instituted price controls, which just causes all kinds of shortages and crises. But then, of course, there are American sanctions and interventions and kicking them out of the global economic system and all this kind of stuff, which I think, as Greg Palast put it, if you did that to Canada, which does not have a hyperinflation problem anyway, but if you just declared economic war against them and sought to kick them out of SWIFT and the Bank for International Settlements and all of these things, then that would lead to the destruction of the Canadian dollar as well. And so, I don't know. I actually called Bob Murphy. I haven't heard back. I called Bob Murphy and said, yeah, I'd really like for someone who actually knows what he's talking about, someone who refuses to have a dog in the fight, to say, look, apparently there was this much hyperinflation up until this day that can seemingly be blamed on the Venezuelans. But any hyperinflation after that, you have to start to include blaming the Americans and their intervention as well. He hasn't, I guess finished the work yet. He said he was going to look into it. But, one of the things about this, I'm sure you've noticed, Kyle, is everybody's narrative is just based on whose side you're on. It's not about what's going on in Venezuela. It's about, are you some kind of pinko or are you some kind of conservative? And so those are the sides. Where it's, as a libertarian, to me, I'm not impressed by that kind of garbage at all. I think it's perfectly fine to say that Maduro is a lousy economist and a lousy president and maybe an electoral thief, and that this is an American-sponsored coup, that it's 100% illegitimate, that America has no right to do it whatsoever, that this guy Guaido, who has specifically and openly left open the possibility of supporting an American military intervention to put him in power there, is exactly the kind of person who would do such a thing. A traitor to the people of Venezuela. Maduro might be a horrible tyrant, but for this guy Guaido to say that, yeah, maybe I need the U.S. Army to put me in there, that ought to be all you need to know about who he is and what legitimacy he has to the people of Venezuela, or what it might look like if they actually proceeded with this regime change operation and figured out a way to force it through, how violent and horrible it would end up being, which I'm not predicting, by the way, but I really don't know.
Right. Well, I have found it very interesting on the political end of it to find myself now opposed, to Donald Trump's policy here of Venezuela, and the Never Trumpers are, calling me commies. And I don't get it. You would think that the Never Trumpers would be absolutely opposed to Donald Trump's intervention, but you even have left wing, Never Trump people finding a way to hate the Maduro government and calling for a regime change and aligning themselves with the likes of Elliot Abrams, John Bolton, Donald Trump. It just seems insane to me.
Well, now leftists or liberals?
Liberals, yeah. People on the left, not, center left or whatever Hillary Clinton is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, typically leftists see through this, not always, but, I talked with Anthony Gregory, and he's always such a great analyst of all these things. He says, the best thing about the liberals always was that they weren't the leftists. And the best thing about the leftists was that they weren't the liberals, right? Because the leftists are good on imperialism and cops and prisons and that kind of thing, right? But man, they're absolutely horrible on property and economics. The liberals have made their peace with property and economics, but only in the worst way. They've made their peace with business, which has bribed them into becoming global imperialists and murderers and essentially conservatives in so many ways. But what was good was their division and the way that they balanced each other out on the good stuff and the bad stuff, kind of. But then, as Anthony was saying, the problem now is how they're closing ranks against the Trumpian threat. But they're doing it in all the worst ways, or mostly. So you don't really see the liberals becoming good on war like the leftists. You see the leftists becoming less good on war in order to appease and fit better with the liberals. And then you see the liberals getting worse on socialism in order to appease the left-wing base. And so now matters are worse.
So, kind of looking at what's going on in Venezuela, today is I guess the initial regime change effort didn't seem to really work out. This guy declared himself president, the U.S. and everybody else recognized him, but the Venezuelan military didn't. And so Maduro is still the controlling power in Venezuela. But now the U.S. is stacking up a whole bunch of aid on the border with Colombia. And what are they trying to do? Maybe start a standoff or something like that? I'm not sure if you have.
Well, it's a PR stunt. Actually, there was a great piece by first of all, on the first point about the military, Sheldon Richman made a good point to me, which was, who cares whose side the military takes, as though that's, the stamp of approval. But I think the real point there, and there were some leftists saying that, this was the measure of whether Guaido's effort was legit or not. And I think that would certainly be the wrong way to look at it. But the right way to look at it would be, hey, your right-wing putsch failed if you didn't get the military on board, right? You either did your coup or you didn't. And it looks like in this case, they didn't. Not only did they not get the military on board, but the entire executive branch of the national government there in Venezuela, such as it is, has not switched from Maduro to Guaido. So unless there's some kind of war, it looks like the thing's already fizzling out. It looked like a very poorly planned thing. I'm sure. Oh, your news roundup. That Wall Street Journal article said that only 4 men knew, 5 men if you include Vice President Pence. But 4 of the Venezuelan oppositionists even knew he was going to declare himself president. And when he did, a few of his associates in the opposition walked off the stage because they were taken by surprise and they did not approve of it. And so that goes to show, how well they've got their act together as far as getting this thing accomplished. I would like to see everyone just forget this ever happened and just, you know what I mean? Okay, we tried it. It didn't work. Let's back down. Sort of like in 2002. They tried to overthrow Chavez. They did overthrow him for a day or two, and then they had to take him back again, and then they just pretended that never happened. Let's just move on and kill Iraqis now or whatever's next. And I think we'll be lucky if we have some kind of ending to that, along those lines there. Not the Iraqi part, but the forget that this whole thing ever happened kind of thing, because it looks like it's really not going anywhere. But then, so the aid thing that you're talking about, Adam Johnson at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting had a great write-up on this that we ran at antiwar.com about how this is a publicity stunt. There's this, I guess highway bridge into Colombia that has never been opened. From the time that they built it, it's been blockaded by the Maduro government. And so then they are putting out a bunch of pictures, a bunch of press releases saying, oh, see, they're blocking the highway and refusing to allow the aid to come in, when they're clearly doing that for a public relations purpose. And that highway was already blocked anyway. And as Adam Johnson says in that article, the Red Cross and all the other aid groups begged the Americans to not send all this aid in this publicity stunt fashion, because it wasn't going to make it to any people, and it was just going to cause a reaction and make things worse. And so if you're really interested in getting aid to these people, then you wouldn't go about doing it this way. And then they did it anyway, because of course that's exactly what it was a publicity stunt rather than a real attempt to get food aid to people. And by the way, I don't know exactly how it is all over the country, but I read an article by a Russian reporter that was translated over at the Sakers blog that someone had posted in the Reddit group, where, it's kind of funny. He talks about being robbed by a cop for his cell phone and some other things like this. So he's clearly not there to just spin for Venezuela or anything like that. If you read it, it's sort of like a Gonzo, kind of a Rolling Stone first-person report kind of a take, And he's saying, yeah, there's a huge protest today. One anti-government and one pro-government, one on the east side of town, one on the west side of town. And there are, a couple of 10,000 or maybe even more in each protest. And the cops keep them very separate from each other. But the rest of the city is going about its day. There's not a revolution afoot here. There's not a general strike and a demand by the people for some major regime change. And I don't know, the history, the dates of the changes in the policies and what have you, but clearly at least some of the price controls have been lifted, because he shows that the grocery stores are full of food, and including the government store is full of toilet paper and milk and eggs and basic staples. But the open for business grocery store has shelves full. So, hyperinflation is incredibly destructive to savings and that kind of thing. But typically speaking, you should still be able to get food to the markets and this kind of thing as people adjust, as long as the government doesn't put price controls on it. It's price controls that cause shortages, not just the hyperinflation itself. So without the price controls, the shelves are full. People are eating. Obviously the economy is not great. But you're talking about a country that had, very poor social statistics for the poor majority in the country before the socialists came. They raised their standard of living by quite a bit. Before that, it's not like it was libertarianism down there before that. Before that, it was socialism only for the richest, whitest people. Chavez came and made it socialism for everyone, and clearly he and his successor overpromised. And you know what? It's interesting too. I'm trying to remember if someone was explaining this or it's just some stuff I read. I can't. It used to be my one talent, Kyle, was I could remember what the hell. But now I can't remember anymore. But I was reading a thing about how it was almost like they deliberately inflicted the resource curse on Venezuela, where they had a fairly diverse economy and a hell of a lot of oil all along. But when Chavez came and built up the socialist state on the Bush era oil prices as though it was always going to stay that way forever, at the same time, they had this extremely kind of flippant attitude toward the rest of the economy and whether, anything else needed to be developed or even sustained. And, the thing I read said that it was something I read. I can't remember what, but they're importing like 95% of their food. Which is just outrageous. That they basically just, everyone quit working so they could just live off the oil money. Essentially, the whole economy was just diverted to the oil money only. And then so now when the oil prices, crash low, that puts them in a horrible position. But, something else, one more thing about this was that the article by that Russian that I was reading, he was talking about the poor and how not just the poor, but everybody gets a free tank of gas a day, which is pretty much all you need. Even if you drive a cab for a living and you do nothing but drive all day, that's pretty much a tank of gas, not two. You know what I mean? So, and you know what? With fuel efficiency nowadays, it might even be, might last you 2 days. But everybody gets a free tank of gas a day. And if you're really poor and can't afford somewhere to live, they'll give you a house. And the way they wrote it was, it still belongs to the government, but not really. These people own these houses. And try to tell them that you're going to take their Maduro away and take all their free stuff away. And these are people who had nothing before. They're Indians or whatever other poor people who, this is a huge increase of their standard in living from nothing to a little bit of something. And they're completely dependent on the government for it. And there's no other economy for them to depend on. So you take it away from them. And by the way, I don't think the opposition is threatening to take it away from them. I think they know better than that. But at the same time, that seems to probably be the impression, right? That this is when the new guys come, the freebies are going to only be for the rich white folks again. And everybody else is going to be frozen out, which sounds, likely to me. If I was a Venezuelan, that's what I would believe too. As a Texan, that's what I believe would happen if they're successful in their coup here. And you know what? One more thing. Sorry, I keep saying one more thing. John Bolton said on Fox News that we want to take the oil. We want American oil companies to develop that oil and the money. So we get the money and the oil. And he said the excuse for this, just outright theft. And if they were able to really push this through, then, you'd have to go ahead and throw in murder with theft. And his justification for that is that I forgot exactly which adjective he used or whatever, but that this would be tremendous and very, very successful and have a huge impact, a huge effect for the benefit of the American economy overall, which is a ridiculous hoax. Like, who could possibly believe that? That in a $20 trillion economy, even a few tens of billions of dollars worth of oil money being ripped off from the Venezuelans would do something to change the fortunes of the country overall is absolutely a ridiculous hoax. How could anyone believe that for a minute? Well, that would do anything other than benefit the actual particularly politically connected corporations that get the contract to do it.
I bet Donald Trump believes it. I mean, he does with the whole thing with the Saudi arms sales as well. Is right? That, we need the money from the arms sales, to help our economy. So if he's, hoping Donald Trump is sitting there watching Fox News when he's saying it, he, that's probably his target audience.
Right. I mean, that's what he always said about Iraq. And, some of the time, a couple of times, it sounded like he was saying, geez, we invaded this country. We got nothing for it. But then some of the times he made it really clear that he really thought that, hey, we're going to invade a country. We should take the oil. And I don't know exactly how he thinks that works. Like you're just going to scoop it all up and bring it somewhere. That means permanent occupation in order to continue to produce from those oil fields forever. But that essentially is his mindset, is like a 19th century imperialist, mercantilist, zero-sum game of wealth. You know, it's the U.S. versus the world. That's why he's a little bit better. I won't say good, but a little less worse on NATO and CETO and this kind of thing, because to him, he looks at it like, well, why are we paying for the Germans' defense and the Japanese defense? These are two of the most wealthy countries in the world and our close allies and friends. We're not going to have to fight them. So, but why are we paying for them when, if anything, we whoop them in the war, they should be paying us? That's just his point of view. So it's hard to get him to believe in all of this, you know, exceptionalism and altruism, essentially, in foreign policy, right? Because that's the way the think tankers always spin it all, is that, you know, you can tell that America means well because Donald Trump is right. None of the things we do are in the American people's interests at all. But that's how you know that, because we're doing this, we're sacrificing our own efforts for the good of others. You know, that's the part that they're having trouble convincing him, I guess. But
well, I guess the last thing I just wanted to ask on Venezuela, we have the oil sanctions in place now. So just comparing it to Iran, and you know, your hope that we could just forget about it, is there? I guess not Iran, Iraq. Is there a chance that, you know, there's like this just huge humanitarian crisis caused by oil sanctions?
You know, I really don't know. I'd like to learn more. And yeah, I'm sorry I lost my train of thought there. I just meant to wrap up with, so you could see why Donald Trump, agreeing with you, why he would be convinced by an argument like that. Oh, we just take their oil and all of a sudden it makes sense now. Now, as far as the sanctions in the meantime, I don't know how bad it's going to be. And I don't, you know, in the blockade against Iraq, it was the UN Security Council. It was the entire world was mandated to boycott Iraq. We don't have that in this case. And so whether the Chinese are, you know, interested in, you know, reshuffling their orders around to prioritize buying Venezuelan oil in order to help them out or not, or something like that, I really don't know. But I mean, the real point of what you're saying is, to me, about just how it goes without saying that, yeah, we strangle the civilian population of a country and deliberately and out loud admit our policymakers will explain that their purpose is to make the civilian population weak and miserable, to punish them for not overthrowing their government. When, of course, just like in the case of Iraq, the more we punish them, the weaker they are, literally, and also, you know, in comparison to their government. They're less and less able to overthrow their government the more that we persecute them. And so, and really, you know, I'm trying to remember who did a study about this. I know Rothbard did a study, but it was years ago. I think there have been studies since then about the effect of sanctions, the efficacy of sanctions. And I don't think anyone can point to, I guess some would say South African apartheid would be like the one exception. But even then, that's complicated and a lot of different factors going on there. But, you know, certainly we saw with Iraq and we've seen with Iran that starving the civilian population is no way to get them to turn against their government. That just, if anything, empowers their government, of course. War is the health of the state. Same thing for economic war. The Ayatollah or Saddam or Maduro or whoever get to then scapegoat all of their opposition as being backed by the Yankee CIA, that they're not actually legitimate dissenters at all. They're being paid to pretend that they are, and that all true Iranian patriots support the Ayatollah and this kind of thing. This is completely counterproductive. And as Palast said, and I forget who else said this, everything I've read about this says that since in the last few weeks in the blatant American intervention in Venezuela, that Maduro's poll numbers have gone up because, you know, we're all commies now as long as it's the Yankees who are coming and trying to tell them what to do. Just like Nasser Arabi says about the Houthis in Sana'a. You know, Nasser Arabi, the reporter out of Yemen, he goes, look, we're all Houthis now. You know, yeah, so it used to be Saleh. Now it's the Houthis. Different faction taking their turn in power, running the government. That's essentially how most of the people of the country look at it. They don't all have to be Zaidi Shia to accept that You know, that's like saying we got to all be from Arkansas to accept the rule of Bill Clinton or whatever. When he's elected, he's elected, he's elected. This party wins, whatever. In this case, they sort of seized power, but hey, look who they seized it from. Power that was just as illegitimate. And then they're under attack by the Saudi-led coalition, which I don't know if you saw the new thing in Haaretz yesterday about the Israeli role and their mercenaries' role in the war there. But it's, you know, Saudi and UAE and USA and Sudan and all of these and Israel and all these different mercenary groups fighting against the people of Yemen. So of course they rally around whoever their leader is. But the plan is to make them so hungry that they will say, all right, I'm so hungry that if America wants me to overthrow the Houthis, I guess I'll go ahead and take the foreign invaders' side in the war against my country and help them fight against my own government. Does that make any sense at all? It's completely stupid and crazy and murderous. I mean, what would you call it if some group of countries ganged up to deliberately inflict a famine on the people of this country or on, I don't know, the Jewish Israelis, our friends somewhere in the world? It'd be a genocide. It would be crimes against humanity. It would be a casus belli, right? But we can do it and it's fine. And you know what? This one's really bothering me too, because I think just like with Iraq and especially because of the inattention to the war in Yemen. I'm sorry, I'm changing the subject to Yemen on you here, but this is the kind of thing where this is like, I'm not exactly sure how to articulate this. This is the kind of thing that will be a part of America's historical reputation forever. Not just our government, not just the Republicans and the Democrats and Obama and Trump, but our society, our country, our land, our people. This is a thing that we have done, are doing. And the level of cruelty, and especially in ratio to the level of inattention, it's just incredible to see. But, you know, when this war is over, we're going to find from the excess death counts and surveys and that kind of thing that more than 1 million civilians died in this thing. And something that Obama said from the very beginning was just done to placate the Saudis. Not even the slightest pretension that this was in America's national interest at all. In fact, as I recently found this Wall Street Journal article where as of January 2015, DOD was working with the Houthis to fight against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So, I mean, what does that mean? When America, we're not just the country that did this to Iraq and Syria and Libya, but waged this medieval starvation campaign against the peasants of Yemen like this. I mean, these are war crimes. This is the kind of thing that goes down in history like the very worst tyrants and murderers, like Saddam Hussein, like Tamerlane, or for that matter, the communists in Russia and China. I mean, this is absolute, it's just murder.
Yeah, well, I mean, on this one, it was like when I first started like writing my blog and stuff that this, you know, the U.S. role in this war started. And so the whole time it's just been so unbelievable to me because it seems like it's so obvious what's going on here. At some point, somebody's going to say something and it's just everybody's going to stop doing it. Like you're starving the whole population. But it's drug on for almost 4 years now. I don't know what to say about it. How frustrating it must be because you've been watching this for years and years and years. This is, you know, like the first time that I've been writing on it and just seeing it happen. And I mean, even now, like we could barely get the Congress to do anything. You know, the House finally passed a resolution, but by the time the Senate does it and, you know, Trump's veto, who knows what's going to happen there?
Yeah. And, you know, I forgot who it was. Man, I'm really bad now. One of these expert genius people on my show was explaining that there's different kinds of resolutions, and one's a concurrent resolution and the other is the other kind. I forgot. But that apparently the kind they passed is the kind that Trump can veto. There's another kind of resolution that if they'd passed it, it wouldn't be a veto. It would just be their declaration on their own authority that he would be forced to obey. But this, they still leave it up to him. And he's already vowed to veto it. And they don't have anything like the numbers it would take to override the veto, which means that they're not going to try. I mean, to me, if he vetoed it and they said, well, we don't care, we're suspending all other business until this veto is overridden. No Republican, no Democrat is going to pass a single thing until this thing is through, whatever. That's what I would try to do, is fight like hell about it and make as much noise and bring as much attention to it as possible. But I don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough in the House that will be willing to make a stand. There's probably only like 10 or 20 of them. And I think that was Reese Ehrlich on your show that pointed that out about the kinds of resolutions and which one this is for.
Right.
I wanted to ask about Iran. And this one, just looking at it, Trump's, I would say, most consistent foreign policy has been his hostility towards Iran, his desire to get out of the nuclear deal and actually doing it, even though Iran's not violating it. The fact that he's surrounded by Pompeo, Bolton, and a ton of other hawks. And they've set up all these conditions that Iran must meet, that Iran just isn't gonna meet. It would require them to give up all their sovereignty. Trump's tweeting it in Persian, telling them to overthrow their government, and we support the Iranian people that are oppressed. So I don't know. It looks pretty bleak, but I guess make it sound a little bit better, Scott.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they can't have a regime change there. I don't know what they're doing. I wish I had a better handle on, exactly what finding he's signed, delegating what authority. And clearly the CIA is up to something. And there was a report, I think it was a Wall Street Journal report, about this working group, they called it, with the Israelis and some others to try to come up with something. But it's not 1953. And the CIA has no presence in that country. And they could drop a JDAM on the Ayatollah's house in the middle of the night, I guess. A rod from God or something like that, if they wanted to go that route. But, the Pentagon does not want to have a war with Iran. This has been the story since the Bush years that, if it came to a full-scale war, America would win it eventually, even without a full-scale invasion. We just bomb the hell out of them for a year or something. And then, depending on how badly they wanted to bomb them, if they wanted to carpet bomb the place, eventually they would, they have the planes, they have the munitions to do it. But, the Army and the Marine Corps, they don't want to invade Persia. And the Special Operations Command that have to go in there and try to take out the anti-aircraft, you're talking about losing a lot of guys in something like that. And so far, they have essentially vetoed any, civilian effort to pick this fight, and that includes the Israelis, of course. But, George Bush told Ehud Olmert, we're not doing this, pal. Sorry. And for that matter, Admiral Fallon, the chairman of CENTCOM, 12 years ago, in the spring of early part of 2007, and then later the CIA chimed in. But first, Admiral Fallon said, this is happening over my dead body. We're just not doing this. So screw you. I mean, you can call that full insubordination by the commander of CENTCOM to the president and the vice president. That you want to bomb Iran? You bomb them because my men aren't going to do it. How do you like that? And he wasn't even saying I'll resign first. He was saying I'll sit right in this chair and refuse to obey those orders, which was huge at the time. And then a couple of months later, the CIA and the rest of the entire intelligence community put out the NIE saying they're not even making nukes anyway. So there goes your pretext, pals. And then that was it. So I think, I don't want to assume too much because those things can change. But I think we should start off our discussion with the understanding that, even if Netanyahu wants a war, which I'm not so sure about that, I think he likes having the enemy sitting there. But even if Netanyahu wants a war, that doesn't mean that the Pentagon's going to oblige him. And even if Trump really wanted it, I don't think the Pentagon would necessarily oblige him on this. But then again, they do hate Iran. They just don't want to get killed in a big fight and see a big mess. But if some shooting breaks out somewhere, then, all bets very well could be off, I guess. But so then if war is off the table, then that raises the question of, so what would be allowed then? And I think it's fair to assume, I really should try to get some good sources on this to find out. But I think it's fair to assume that Trump has authorized covert action. We've seen support for MEK protests in Iran and attempted protests. Mohammed Sahimi had that great piece that he wrote about all the, kind of sock puppet protesters. First of all, you have the MEK and then, of course, the Shah Pahlavi's family. But there are a few other groups inside Iran. And one of the things he talked about was how they had made a big deal about holding a day of protests. And some of them had warned against it. So we shouldn't do this. We don't have the support to do this. And it's going to make us look bad. But they went ahead anyway. And then no one showed up. And they looked like idiots, But you could also see some of this where there was one protest back a few months ago, maybe the end of last year, where some of the protesters were saying, stop spending our money in Syria. We want it spent here at home or something. We're like, and then Mike Pompeo and some of the other American, functionaries were saying, yeah, the people of Iran are sick and tired of their government spending money on its expansive and interventionist foreign policy when they want that money spent at home. And it was just like, first of all, that's the American people you're talking about. And then second of all, how blatant is that? That he's not even like referring to them, saying, you see what these protesters said, which probably still would have been blatant, but he's just using the exact same talking point, essentially, right? When I think, there have been other indications, I forget which all polls now or whatever, there's every reason to believe that the people of Iran support the effort against the Islamic State in Syria, which is what Iran has been fighting, just like the American people support the effort against the Islamic State in Syria, which is what the Americans are fighting there, some of them. Show me a real poll that says that the people of Iran are so sick and tired of them spending, a 0.1% of their budget on Hezbollah or whatever it is. It's nonsense. And then there was a massive terrorist attack. This group calling themselves Jaish al-Adl, some Balukis. I don't know exactly their, bin Ladenite pedigree, but probably it's a safe guess that they're, related at least to the group Jandala that was, paid by the Americans and the Israelis to commit terrorist attacks inside Iran in the late Bush Jr. years. But they killed, I don't know, the reports varied, but one Iranian report had 41 Revolutionary Guard officers on this bus who were blown up and killed. I mean, can you imagine if some terrorists inside the United States had found a bus full of generals on their way to some meeting or whatever and had suicide bombed them and killed them? Well, I mean, Trump would nuke Tehran, essentially, is what would be the result of that. I mean, imagine the level of outrage. And now, that's not to say that the bin Ladenites don't have their own motives to do this. There's no reason to necessarily believe that America and Israel had to put them up to it. Because, there's an important lesson in the fact that the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda bin Ladenite terrorists have absolutely a death mark on the Ayatollah's head. They would love nothing more than to see a regime change in Tehran and chaos unleashed, sectarian violence unleashed in Persia. And so, that ought to be, forget the whole even question of American covert support for that level of violence, just for the sake of argument for the time being. But just, this should be a cause for Americans to stop and ask themselves, well, wait, who all is on whose side here now? If the bin Ladenites are blowing up the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, then whose side do I pick again? Or at least, whose side am I supposed to hate more and why? TV says I'm supposed to hate the Shiites more, but it wasn't Hezbollah that knocked the towers down. It was the bin Ladenites, who are essentially the radical edge of our same alliance system, the Saudis and the Sunni kings, the Sunni Arab kings. In revenge against the Shiite Persians, since they declared independence from us back in 79. And it's interesting. You got to read, Kyle. Have you ever read Treacherous Alliance by Trita Parsi?
No, I haven't.
Oh, man, you got to read it, dude. You got to read it. And I'm such an idiot for not having read it in 2005 when the thing came out. And that goes for all of us. Everyone read that book. I mean, so I already knew that there's such a thing as the doctrine of the periphery in Israel, that they had this policy for a long time of support the Iranians, support the Turks, support the Ethiopians and others who are basically on the outside on the far border of all of their near enemies, right? In order to keep the Arabs divided on two flanks, basically, literally and figuratively, in order to, as strategy to keep the different sides balanced against each other. And this was the Menachem Begin policy and all the way through, really. And this was why after the revolution in Iran in the 1980s, the Israelis' policy didn't change. And that was why when Ronald Reagan wanted to sell the Iranians missiles, he went through the Israelis because they still had that connection. And as Trita explains, the worse the Ayatollah would threaten Israel, all that ever meant was there had been an escalation of cooperation recently. And so since the Israelis were helping train his guys still and were or I don't know if training was going on. That was still during the Shah, but they're still selling weapons to, and training the Iranians on the use of those weapons. As long as all this is going on, the Ayatollah Khomeini, the meaner, older Ayatollah, 1980s Ayatollah, would get up there and go, "We're going to burn you to the ground," rah, right? Just to cover up for the fact of how close they still were. And then it wasn't, and we've talked about this with Gareth Porter. You probably heard me talk about this with Gareth about how when Yitzhak Rabin came in with Shimon Peres as his right-hand man in the beginning of the 90s, they changed. They abandoned the periphery strategy and they turned it all around. And they said, no, we want to make peace with the Palestinians, which does not, as Jeremy Hammond and others have shown for sure, does not mean they were really going to give up the West Bank for true independence for the Palestinians. But from their point of view anyway, they were giving up the West Bank. They were going to at least make peace. They were going to end the conflict with the Palestinians by giving them as much as they were going to get, and that would be the end of it anyway, if you want to phrase it that way. But it was enough that they needed then to demonize Iran. If they're going to make friends with the Arabs, if they're going to continue, and they already had a peace treaty with Egypt and Jordan since 79, but if they're going to continue along those lines and make peace with the other Arab states, then and with the Palestinians, then they need to have an enemy somewhere. And so they turned on the Iranians and started demonizing them. And of course, this was also, as one strategist told Trita Parsi, this is the glue to keep the Israeli government allied with the American one, that the new enemy after the Soviet Union would be radical Islam, a little vague, but good enough. And radical Islam is represented by Iran. And so that's why, and it's funny because he talks about what a ridiculous joke this was inside the U.S. government at the time, right? In the Bill Clinton government, where they were like, "Oh, you guys all of a sudden hate Iran, huh?" This was such a blatant, ridiculous 180 when the Iranians hadn't done anything to deserve it. It was clearly just part of Israeli strategy to do this. Now we have to have dual containment and all this because of the Iranian threat, and how the Clintons just laughed at it. I mean, they went along with it, but they didn't take it seriously because they could see, what a cynical turn it was, essentially. So, unfortunately, my interview last week with Trita was cut short. He had to go. So I wanted to get much further into, okay, so where are we now on this whole back and forth with the periphery strategy? Because if you look at it now, it looks like Netanyahu is essentially instituting the Rabin doctrine, the Rabin-Peres doctrine, which is ally with all the Arabs while demonizing Iran, and not true independence, but the Likud version of peace with the Palestinians, which is this deal of the century that the Likud, aka the Trump government, are about to try to foist down the Palestinians' throat, where they get, this little neighborhood east of East Jerusalem to be their capital, and they get 22% of 22% of the West Bank, or whatever it is, some horrible, much less than just solution. And so that's, I think, the true lens to look at all this stuff through is through, the broader strategies. I don't know how much strategy is going on in the White House right now, but certainly in Israel and Iran, their strategies toward each other and balancing. Of course, Iraq is in the middle, so they have a lot to do with these different countries trying to balance each other. And then, as I'm always ranting in every statement I ever make on any issue, essentially, that the Likudniks in the U.S. government, and not really Sharon's guys. It was Netanyahu's guys more than Sharon's guys, but Sharon got on board for it too. They were the ones who pushed the Iraq War. And it was because they were stupid and they believed Chalabi when Chalabi told them that America will have easy dominance over the supermajority Shia if they put them in power, and that the new Iraq, the new Shia Iraq, will be friends with Israel, and that this will help undercut Iranian support for Syria and Hezbollah, which is completely stupid. But if you read the clean break, that's what they say. And their idea was that, we will be in a position to then put all this new pressure on Iran and Syria and Hezbollah by having this victory in Iraq. But of course, it didn't work out that way at all. And from the very beginning, Chalabi was out, and Bush and his men chose the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq and the Dawa Party, the Hakim family, essentially their faction, and the Dawa Party to come in and be the leaders, because there was really no one else to take charge of the new Shiite supermajority government. And they thought that the new Iraqi Shiite government would need USA more than Iran because we have all the money and weapons. But the reality was, no, Iran is the country next door and has all the weapons that they need. And they're the supermajority. So once America was done putting them in power, they don't need a foreign government from the other side of the planet to prop them up the way Saddam Hussein did when he was backed by the United States and our allies. And so they said, get the hell out. And this represents a gigantic, assuming the prerogatives of the American empire for the sake of argument, this represents a huge failure and a huge own goal type error in judgment of what was expected to happen with Iraq War II. So then everything else going on in the region should be understood through the lens of the U.S. government trying to make up for that somehow. That was why they sought regime change against Assad. Was Bush put them up 2 pegs in Baghdad. At least maybe we can try to take them down 1 peg by kicking out their ally in Damascus, and that kind of thing. So look at it from their point of view now, from the Likudniks' point of view, where they're trying to demonize Iran and play up Iran as the greatest enemy in the world, and then they actually empower Iran beyond the Ayatollah's wildest dreams. So now they're just throwing a temper tantrum over it. Now they just don't know what to do. They cannot reverse what George W. Bush did. And so, and by the way, man, there's some new articles. If you look on the blog, I linked to a couple articles about Iraq War 3.5 going on now in a Western Iraqi Sunnistan. The Islamic State is gone, but the insurgency remains, and the Shiite reprisals against the Sunnis are now worse than ever before after the Islamic State. And there's going to continue to be a Sunni-based insurgency and a bin Ladenite-based Sunni-based insurgency, suicide bomber type, Zarqawiyite groups fighting in Iraqi Sunnistan for the rest of our lifetimes, and backed by Saudi Arabia and flinging suicide bombers at Shiite Baghdad and never getting anywhere. But they're never going to stop. Man. So yeah. So then, boy, I don't know, Scott Horton, you sound like kind of a kook when you say that maybe CIA would be backing bin Ladenite suicide bombers in Iran, and then, but yeah, no, because America backed suicide bombers in Syria since 2011 through 15 at least. Really, Trump didn't call off support for him till summer of 2017. And George Bush started it. The redirection didn't start under Obama. The redirection started under Bush. Khalilzad, who put Maliki in there, who chose Maliki as the best Dawa Party leader we got, then turned right around and told George Bush, okay, now we got to start tilting back toward the Sunnis since we screwed this up so bad. We, meaning Khalilzad and his friends. Khalilzad, original Straussian neocon. Khalilzad, co-author of the Defense Planning Guidance of 1992. Khalilzad, who helped lie us into Iraq War II, who picked Karzai to be the dictator of Afghanistan, and who is currently did I say Khalilzad? Did I start calling him Karzai? No, Khalilzad, who picked Karzai, and who is currently the ambassador or the special representative negotiating our exit from Afghanistan. interestingly enough.
Well, maybe we should just go ahead and talk about that unless you have anything else to add about Iran. I mean, this is your book, Scott Horton. What's going to happen in Afghanistan? Are we coming home?
It looks like it. I mean, I have to say that there's always plenty of wiggle room. Anything can change. So this is just speculation. But it sure looks to me, my interpretation essentially, is that Trump must have told Khalilzad that, I don't care. We are leaving. The clock is ticking. If you can find a way to save us a little bit of face on the way out, good. But don't mistake that for me changing my mind, because I ain't. He must have said something like that. And the reason I say that is because the first thing they did was they ceased the Bush and Obama mandate, and for that matter, the McMaster mandate, that no talks with the Taliban except through the Afghan government, which, of course, as Matthew Ho points out in his new piece that we're running on antiwar.com as the Spotlight today, that just gives the Afghan government the incentive to never talk with the Taliban, because if they make peace with the Taliban, that would jeopardize the support they're getting from the U.S. And so even though in the long term that would be a smart thing for them to do, in the short term, at any given short term, it's counterproductive for them. And so as Ho says, he was approached by Taliban guys who wanted to make peace with him back when he was over there before the Afghan surge under Obama ever even started. And he was told to tell them, no, we will not talk to you. You can only talk to the Afghan government, which would not talk to them. Well, that condition is gone. The Americans are talking directly with the Taliban right now. The Taliban have said all along that their only condition is get out, and they will not compromise on it. No foreign troops in the country at all. That means you disinvited, and you will not have peace, and you will not have an end to the insurgency until you get your troops out. And they have refused to bend on that all these years. And there's no indication that they are bending on that. And the Americans have essentially, according to leaks, there's no final version of a peace deal yet, but according to leaks, they're willing to essentially agree to leave. Now, there were some reports that had them saying, no, we got to keep the Bagram Air Base. We love Bagram Air Base so bad. We got such a sunk cost fallacy going on with that thing, and we have to hang on to it. And the Taliban said, okay, well, we're just going to stay at war with you then. And then, it was a week later, reports came out that said that the last condition, there was only one condition. And this is just unbelievable to me. And maybe in a bad way, maybe it just isn't believable. But they said they were willing to settle for a promise from the Taliban that they would keep ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and any international terrorist groups out, which they obviously have a huge incentive to do, and which they've been promising all along that they would be happy to do. Certainly any obligation they ever had to Al-Qaeda is long overdue, long paid and done. And so, I don't know if I thought I'd ever hear in my lifetime that the Americans would agree to that. I say in the book that we should just go. We shouldn't even talk to the Taliban. We should just go. We should tell the people of Kabul, good luck. Sorry. And that Trump should blame it all on Bush and Obama and just cut and run. That's it. Because as I put it in there, I can't imagine a situation where the Americans would actually shake hands with the Taliban on the way out the door and agree to them taking over. I mean, America lost the war. If we talk to them, it's America coming to their terms, which I can't imagine a bunch of American civilians and military officers going along with. So maybe Trump's proven me wrong about that. I really don't know. And I think it's unique and interesting and good for us that he has a particular thing against this war. He just thinks it's so stupid. And it is. So, the reality of it, of course, continues to reinforce his essential belief about it, that this is a giant waste of time and money and lives, and that it accomplishes nothing. And what the hell are we even doing there? And so, he's not a non-interventionist, but he just has a grudge on this. He just has a reason. As I pointed out before, when Obama announced the surge and all this, Trump opposed him. He railed against the Obama surge and railed against Obama for the Afghan war. But when Obama said, okay, surge is over, it's 2012, clock ticking, troops out, and the generals tried to start pushing back and say, no, we really need to stay, Donald Trump took to Twitter to defend Obama by name and say, no, the president is right about this. The generals are wrong, and they need to back down and do what they're told and get the hell out of Afghanistan now. And that, I think, is really telling, because he hated Barack Obama. He had such a personal vendetta against Barack Obama. And in that case, he was willing to side with Obama against the generals on leaving a war. Not that Obama got all the troops out, but that was what he said he was doing. And so, anyway, Trump just, quite clearly feels this way about it. Mattis and McMaster had to essentially force him to announce the escalation in the summer. I mean, they did. He could have still said no and asked for their resignations on the spot. I'm not trying to acquit the man for it. But in Bob Woodward's book, he says that Mattis told Trump, hit him with the safe haven myth, but then also said, and then if you leave and anything bad does happen there, I am going to tell everyone that it's your fault and I told you. Which is really extortion. I mean, that was really the way that they made him agree. And they took all the generals, they took him out to Camp David, out to the woods. Is Trump and a couple of CIA guys were the only civilians there, and a bunch of generals. I mean, even his own chief of staff was a Marine Corps general. And the whole group of them, there's a picture of him too. He's all smiling and they're all scowling because, him, he's a showman or whatever. But, all the reporting from that was, they dragged him out there and essentially ganged up on him and made him do it. Anyway, point being, I'm very hopeful about this. I'm very optimistic. Although, here's my huge caveat in that. When Trump says we're leaving Syria because we defeated the Islamic State, he's right. The Islamic State is not a state, and it'll never have territory in Syria again. If America leaves, then the Syrian Arab Army, in alliance with the Syrian Kurds, they're going to consolidate all of that land in eastern Syria, and that's going to be the end of any Sunni-based insurgency there at all. Just like in Aleppo and Homs, the war is over. And so if Trump wants to pat himself on the back and take all the credit for that and leave, fine. There's not much that the War Party can say about that other than change the subject and say, no, we have to stay for Iran, which is why they were backing al-Qaeda there in the first place. Different subject, but in Afghanistan, there's nothing like a victory. In Afghanistan, it's like Vietnam, where we hope we can have a decent interval where American troops get out and the Taliban give us a few months, 6 months or a year before they sack Kabul. So hopefully the American people aren't paying attention anymore. And then, but the Taliban are bastards. They're just horrible. They're merciless butchers of civilians. And they fought a very, terrorist inspired insurgent campaign here, brutally punishing civilians, in collective punishment fashion, for being anywhere near the Americans that they can't avoid, or the Kabul government that they're in no position to do anything about. And so I can only assume the worst of them, of their motives, of their tactics, of their thinking and strategy, even from their own point of view of whether, from trying to fight for their own interests. Are they wise enough to stay out of Kabul and to say, you know what, we'll just rule where we're from and leave you guys alone? I don't think so. Apparently no one in Afghanistan is that wise. And it's ironic too, because whoever rules Kabul doesn't necessarily rule the whole country anyway, right? It's an extremely difficult country to take over. The Taliban first, consolidated power over the capital city in 1996. Well, in the fall of 2001, when America intervened, they still weren't done fighting the Northern Alliance. They still had at least, 10 or 15% of the country outside of their control. And that was with the U.S. on their side. The Bill Clinton government policy, at least for a few years, of helping the Saudis and the Pakistanis to help the Taliban take over that country, as I show in the book, with an eye toward consolidating power over the whole country. That was the American policy too, even back then, was there must be one strong central government to provide security so we could build a pipeline through here. That was back then. I'm not saying they want a pipeline now, but everyone seems to agree that even if another 500,000 people got to die in another era of civil war, that someone must control the capital. Whoever controls the capital controls the whole country. And so, the obvious solution would be autonomy and a kind of peace agreement there. And I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think they're going to take the capital city. The Afghan government now is saying, yeah, well, I know. We'll just tell the Taliban they have to turn in all their guns and become a political party and take part in our parliament with us. Come on, man. That's not going to happen. I mean, they have always regarded the government in Kabul as wholly and completely illegitimate. They will not respect it whatsoever. They'll only overthrow it. And so, yeah, it's going to be really ugly. And Trump is, he's wishy-washy enough that I could see him saying, well, I guess we do have to stay then. If it's going to take American air power to keep the Taliban from just marching on the Capitol, then maybe we do have to stay forever after all. I don't know. He could be influenced because there is going to be hell to pay. The powers that America has built up in Kabul, it's like the inflated value of a housing company in 2007. There's a crash coming. U.S. paper dollars and army troops can inflate the value of certain power factions. But at the end of the day, their price value is subjective and, the real authority that they're able to wield over the Afghan people, it only goes as far as it goes without American support. And, you're going to see if you're looking, you're going to see a pretty ugly result. But as I say in the book, that's the same thing as if America stays for another 30 years. And by the way, they have to do a lot of killing while they stay. It's not like there's peace there and then the war is going to break out when we go. It's just that the side we've been backing is going to lose worse when we go. That's all.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a great point to make just because 2018, while the Taliban made a ton of progress and was a really bloody year, for them in suicide attacks against civilians and everything, it was also a record year for American airstrikes.
That's right.
Country, at least since 2009. So we're talking about you had to inflict a massive amount of violence on a country. And I think even then, like kind of that Austrian economics analogy holds that as you have a bigger and bigger bubble, you had to, put more and more in it to keep that, inflated.
And by the way, I'm glad you said that because, there's and we've been covering that at antiwar.com, and everyone please read Jason Ditt's news.antiwar.com, our news editor there. He's like Kyle, but even better, man. No offense, dude. I'm just playing. But he's done such a good job of keeping track of this stuff. And there was a story from, I think just last week or maybe the week before that, where the Americans had bombed this house and killed 16 people in this family, virtually obliterated an entire family, 3 generations, the wife's side and the husband's side and everything. The kind of thing where if this kind of thing happened in your neighborhood, it would just, anyway. And then a week later or a couple of days later, they bombed the funeral and they killed another, score of civilians. And that, when I say bombed, I mean bombed. You're talking about people being torn to shreds. We're talking about the most extreme level of violence that humans can inflict on each other. We're talking about a level of cruelty that Americans are just completely oblivious to stopping and thinking, what does that really mean when a bunch of women and children and fighting age males are torn literally limb from limb by an American airstrike on a civilian target like a family home and then the same family's funeral a few days later. Again, like when we were talking about Yemen, like Ron Paul said in that famous exchange with Giuliani, if we think that we can just go around the world and do whatever we want to people like this without ever suffering the consequences, without ever having to look at them as equals to us, then we do that at our own peril. We're destroying ourselves. We are making ourselves enemies of people who did nothing to us. And can you imagine trying to justify this based on the 9/11 attack that no Afghans participated in any way? That in this country where they've never heard of it. I mean, this is a poll from years ago where 92% of Afghans in this survey had never heard of the September 11th attacks. They had no idea why America had invaded their country. But it wasn't the Taliban that had done it at all. It was a group of Saudis and Arabs hiding out there. Yes, with the Taliban's permission, but hey, it's just, I don't know. And we have this problem too because of George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq and killing 1 million people there, that now anything short of that seems short of that. And it's just the worst kind of, bell curve, grade on a curve kind of a scale that you could think of. Famously used to be Jeremy Scahill was on the Bill Maher show. And Jeremy Scahill is saying, listen, Obama's using these drones. He's killing people. He's making more terrorist enemies for us. It's murderous. It's wrong. And it's counterproductive. It's horrible. And Bill Maher goes, yeah, but George W. Bush marched the entire 3rd Infantry Division into Iraq, man. And Scahill goes, yeah, but so? Hey, man, huh? But to Bill Maher, that's the gold standard now. Anything less than a full-scale invasion with your whole Army and Marine Corps is a surgical strike, some collateral damage, but perfectly acceptable. But it's not.
All right, well, I want to move on and ask you about nukes because we have quite a few things going on with nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy. The first is they developed these low-yield nukes, which I guess are going to be ready to be deployed here pretty soon. And I've heard you on your show talk about the risks of those and why it's a bad thing when, I think most people would hear, oh, low-yield nukes, well, that's better than a big one.
Right. Well, so, by the way, James Carroll wrote a great thing for TomDispatch.com about this last week. It's under Tom Englehart's name at antiwar.com, or it's at TomDispatch.com. Y'all can find it. And I guess I'm trying to get him on the show. I didn't hear back, but I'm going to try again for this week. So this is a very big deal. They're making dial-a-yield nukes, where literally there's a dial on the thing, and you can turn down the level of explosion that you get down to the threshold of so-called usability. Right now, as we speak in 2019, and may it stay this way forever, nobody's used a nuke on anyone else in anger since Harry Truman did it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. There have been a lot of nuclear tests and a lot of deaths from cancer from that, but that's different. But they haven't been used in war, and that's because of what's called the nuclear taboo, which it's such kind of a light phrase for the use of a nuke. But essentially the idea is that nukes cannot really be used in war without provoking a nuclear response in return and nuclear escalation back and forth until the entire future of humanity is jeopardized, until absolute genocides have broken out across the world with these massive multi-megaton city killers. And so that's why they make a good deterrent. Nobody ever uses them because nobody wants to get hit back with them. But then the idea of a usable nuke is to try to come up with a way around that. Some kind of game theory algorithm that says that actually, no, there are some circumstances in which it's advisable to go ahead and start using your nuclear bombs. Just make sure that they're not too big. Just make sure that you use them in the exact proper circumstances, and it should be fine. And one example of this is a doctrine called escalate to de-escalate. And the Americans apparently, at least in some circumstances, have plans to act this way. But I think more importantly, I've read that they believe that this is a Russian doctrine, but the Russians deny it and say this is not a Russian doctrine. And so already you have, people reading, guessing the cards in the other guy's hand playing this game, making these bets when they don't really know what the other guy is going to do. In other words, their game theory algorithm has a lot of letter variables in there that they don't know the values for, but they make their guesses. They go ahead anyway. But anyway, so this theory is that if we got into a war, let's say, for example, Donald Trump continued to sell arms to the government of Ukraine and they sent their Nazi militias back to war against the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. And then the Russians sent special operations guys across the border to help them. We were back at the war at 2015 levels there. In eastern Ukraine, and then some tanks came across the border too, and then the Americans flipped out, and then there was a skirmish in Kaliningrad, which is the strip of Russian territory between the Baltic states and Poland, where the Russians have stationed at least nuclear-capable missiles there. And so you have essentially kind of a small fight begin to escalate very quickly. And people start getting scared that this could lead to a real H-bomb war between America and Russia, that then the Americans might set off a couple of these low-yield nuclear weapons inside Russia even, in order to demonstrate our willingness to go so far as to use nuclear weapons. And that at that point, the Russians will back down. Once they see that we're willing to do that, then they will know that, oh, geez, we better just go ahead and let the Americans have their way. That there is no real red line short of the existence of Russia at all, I guess, that the Russians won't back down from in the American imagination here. But that's insane. That makes no sense. Even if it made a little sense, like, oh, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. Well, but still, how prone to error is that? What if they started dropping nukes on Thursday instead of Wednesday, and that day the Russians decided that, no, even if you're going to use a low-yield nuke, we're going to go ahead and use a medium-yield nuke on your forces in, say, Poland, to demonstrate to you that actually we do have red lines, and actually we're not going to back down on this, and you made a bad move, and so, aha. Now, what do the Americans do? When the Russians have set off a medium-sized nuke, say a megaton or, I don't know, 50 kilotons or 100 kilotons or whatever in Poland and took out an American army base there. Now you have full-scale H-bomb war and we all die. That's it. And you can see that happening because, you know, not even the president. Maybe there are some Russian commanders who, you know, got food poisoning last night and so had a headache this morning. I mean, that could be when you're playing around with doctrines like that, when you have people who believe that human behavior can all be deciphered out in these game theory equations and deliberately choose to forget that we're talking about wet bags of meat and chemicals and electricity that say and do and think and have nightmares about all kinds of things. And the terminology that we invent for computers we should not really turn around and apply all that jargon to ourselves. And, you know, we've seen, thankfully, where humans have intervened and prevented the computers, especially in Russia, and in the United States, too, from starting nuclear wars, right? There's one where there was a bad chip in Colorado at Cheyenne Mountain there. They had a bad chip in a computer that ended up giving a readout that there was a massive Russian nuclear attack on the United States, and it was the wet bags of meat that intervened and said, wait, the computer is wrong. The same thing has happened in Russia, where the computer says it's a American first strike, retaliate now, and then the humans go, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right to me. Let me see. So, but that's the kind of thinking that goes into the nuclear war planning, is that these are the kinds of things that they can get away with. But there's also all kinds of other problems, such as, you know, America and Russia both use cruise missiles with conventional payloads, you know, pretty regularly. But so if somebody is shooting a nuclear capable cruise missile at you and you don't know if it's a nuke or not, or you have a good reason to suspect it's a nuke, but you don't know if it's a 1 kiloton, 15 kilotons, 50 kilotons, or 50 megatons, then what might you do when that thing is hauling ass at you at faster than the speed of sound? now you have problems. I mean, the fact that we're even having this conversation just goes to show that the governments of the world, and particularly of these nuclear weapon states, and particularly of the United States and of Russia, are run by complete psychopaths and lunatics and crazy people, and that the populations of our societies are just as negligent as they could possibly be. I mean, at this point, it's pretty hard to imagine that humanity is going to survive on this little planet floating out here, in thousands of years into the future and into the point where they're colonizing space and this and that and this kind of thing. And it's more likely that some humans will end up killing all the rest of the humans and themselves before we ever get that far, because we just allow this to go on. Oh, yeah, I heard there's some debate about dial and nukes, whether they should be bigger or smaller or whatever, but I'll just leave that to the experts to decide. There's, hardly an anti-nuclear movement in America to speak of, certainly not a massive and popular one, when the Soviet Union is gone and when Russian intervention to disrupt our democracy is nothing but a hoax, a ridiculous lie. There's no Russian or, for that matter, Chinese or any other threat to the United States of America at all. It's the perfect time to disarm. So, we could have, forget utopia, okay? We could have 150 kiloton nukes or something like that. That shouldn't be enough to destroy all of humanity forever, even in a worst case scenario. If Russia and China also had 100 or so, it would, if we had a full scale war, it'd certainly destroy our civilizations, but maybe not humanity forever. Seems like that's a reasonable goal, right? To make sure that the worst case scenario does not include the entire extinction of our species. Hey, who are these people and who are we? This is how it is. It's crazy. Sorry, I'm very philosophical about genocide this morning, but man.
Well, I guess you have a reason to be, adding to it the fact that Trump is now withdrawing from the INF Treaty, which seems to be probably his second stupidest policy after withdrawing from the nuke deal with Iran. So right. I guess, can you do you have any idea of if Russia's missile, the one they allege is a intermediate range missile, is actually, or if it's really, as Russia says, like a 400 kilometer missile?
Yeah, I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, just for the sake of argument, I'll give the Americans the benefit of the doubt that they have a pretty good reason to believe that missile could go more than 400 miles, maybe 6 or 7 or whatever it is. I don't know their equations for circumference, times fuel tank times miles per hour and whatever the hell, man. They got a way to guess. So assuming that they're not lying, that they really believe that the Russian missile goes further than they say, they also concede that all of them, that clearly they're part of a doctrine, a Russian doctrine for deployment in the south of Russia for deterrence against China, because China is not part of this treaty. In China, well, neither are we now, but they never were. And they have some medium range missiles that they have set up for their deterrence against Russia. Well, they don't need 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're right there on the same continent together. So medium-range missiles make sense for them. And the Russian argument was, as you're saying, first of all, it doesn't break the treaty, but yeah, sorry, we can't prove that to you, because what are we going to do? Give you some of the missiles to take apart? No. So you'll just have to trust us, which is not that great of a response. But still, they say, but this isn't even about you. These are for China anyway. So the Americans essentially, rather than saying, damn it, Russia, get back to the table here so we can work this out, I'm very disappointed in you. Instead of that, they said, well, we're just going to withdraw from the treaty. And they essentially seem to take advantage of a pretended crisis in order to go ahead and withdraw from the treaty. John Bolton was the same guy who got us out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which was a huge step in a huge provocation to Russia in the 21st century there, along with NATO expansion. That they had this entire plan that survived through partway through the Obama years. Hey, the plan didn't even survive. And yet ratchet tensions up so high in the name of putting anti-missile missiles in Poland and the radars to control them in the Czech Republic. In the name of protecting Poland from Iran. Give me a break. And they're historic friends. or at least, there's certainly no beef there. No reason to think Iran's going to attack Poland with, missiles they may have, armed with nukes they definitely don't have. I mean, the whole thing was completely ridiculous. And everybody laughed, by the way, when George Bush said, yeah, this is to protect Poland from Iran. The Europeans were on video at the time laughing about this. Nobody believed it, and they couldn't keep a straight face about it. Putin himself laughed. And so we all know that this is about Russia. And then it was actually because I remember when Obama said it and then everyone pretended to take it seriously, then I laughed because I said, geez, that's funny. Because when Bush said it, no one believed him at all. When Bush said it, it was so transparent that this is about Russia. And then, but when Obama says it, oh, come on, guys, let's all pretend that this guy is not the exact same lying clown that George Bush is, apparently. Let's go ahead and pretend to believe what we already know is not true. Amazing. But anyway, but now what difference does this make on the American side? I don't really know, because we already have mid-range missiles on subs and on battleships, cruise missiles on battleships in the Baltic Sea. America can nuke Russia with 15 minutes notice anyway. And I don't imagine that the Germans are going to ask the Americans to put a bunch of medium range missiles back in Germany. They may already have, there may still be nukes in Germany right now that I think about it. But I don't think they're going to want to escalate much more of that. Maybe they want to put some in Poland, but that would just be, think of the level of provocation there. And think about how the Americans flipped out when the Russians put missiles in Cuba in direct response to America putting missiles in Turkey, by the way. But the level of provocation here, and again with the Dylan nuke, so you combine leaving the INF Treaty and presumably finding a way to put more medium range missiles, nuclear missiles, back in mainland Europe, combined with the idea that, well, we have some usable nukes, so maybe we could attack a lot of Russian military positions and bases and armored divisions and whatever, without committing genocide and, H-bombing entire Russian cities. So, or at least if you're the Russians, you have to assume that's what the Americans are thinking. That's what it seems like they're thinking that they could do. In other words, by holding the cities for ransom with these strategic nukes, it prevents the use of tactical nukes. But, and this is part of, if you read Daniel Ellsberg's book, there was a part in the Kennedy administration, I think, where McNamara, one of these guys, gave a speech where he said, we're going to no longer target Russian cities. And the Russians took this as a major provocation because it made it sound like, oh, okay, so now we can attack them. Because we're not going to target their civilian populations. We're just going to go ahead and do this in a usable, get away with it type of a way. So this is the kind of insanity. Imagine that, right? That's the position you're in as a Russian. The Americans announced they're no longer targeting your cities for complete genocidal war against your entire civilization. And you know that means that you have to escalate DEFCON 3 to 2. In the Russian version, that this means now a greater threat, or at least that is one way that you have to interpret it, essentially. That's, life in the 20th and 21st century under these things.
Do you know I know Russia has like counterclaims against the United States saying that I think Patriot missile systems and the launchers violate the INF Treaty. Do you know if that's an actual violation? Just because it seems that if it is, the Russian missiles only violate the, actual range by like 100 miles or so. And so it doesn't seem like it's that much of a strategic advantage for Russia. It seems like having the U.S. radar systems and Patriot missiles in Poland or Romania is like keeping the INF Treaty in place. We have a more advantage by our breaking it than Russia does.
Well, it goes to show my ignorance on a couple of things there. I didn't realize he said that, and I didn't realize the program was still on, if it really is. I was under the impression that Obama had canceled that in an agreement. That's the famous clip of him talking with Medvedev and saying, I'll have a lot more leeway to do it after the election. It's actually a good thing, because then after the election he did that and went ahead and canceled that program. That was what I thought. If Putin is saying that that's still going on, then that's two things I didn't know. that it is and that he said that. So I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, they just put out a demand like in the last week or two that the U.S. remove those. I think their MK-41 missile launchers are the ones they have on the submarines for the Tomahawks. I guess they're demanding that the U.S. remove those from Romania.
Well, that's different than the Patriots, though.
Oh, okay.
The Tomahawks are cruise missiles, basically 500-mile range, I think. Where the Patriots are anti-missile missiles.
Okay.
But anyway, I need to know more about that. But I'm sorry. So what was the question then?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it just strategically, I mean, it seems like Russia's not really violating the treaty all that much, anyways. With however long their range is, I mean, it seems like it's a strategic mistake to leave it and risk having the Russians build like pretty decent medium range missiles, and then we're worried about nuclear, land-based nuclear missiles in Europe and everything like that again.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, man. If I was president, I would invite Vladimir Putin to D.C. and I would give a press conference where all I would say is, I don't care if you don't like it. Suck it. God bless America. And then I would go ahead and sign a massive arms reduction pact. And I would happily invite any general who don't like it to quit. And I'd happily invite every woman on CNN to have a hysterical fit to death. Go ahead. Have a nervous breakdown. This is the job. And the thing is, the only reason I even bring that up is because I know that Donald Trump agrees with that. I know that he knows that that's the job. For that matter, Barack Obama did too. Barack Obama went, I don't know if you remember this, but I think in 2009, early, in his first year, if I remember it right, he went to Prague and gave a speech. And the whole first half of the speech was this idealistic thing about a world free of nuclear weapons, how it's insane that we go on like this and blah, 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 all those things. And then, and the people, there are a lot of shots from the point of view of the crowd looking up at him, and people are so excited. They're kind of standing on their tiptoes and they're looking, and he's saying all this dreamy stuff that, makes Democrats swoon. And then he goes, but, anyway, that's all aspirational for decades in the future, some kind of hopeful utopia that'll never happen. But the real reason I'm here is we're going to put some anti-missile missiles in Poland, and we're going to build a radar station here in the Czech Republic. And we really appreciate y'all's imperial cooperation. It'd be unfortunate if I had to leave a garrison here. And the whole crowd is just deflated. And you could just see all their shoulders drop. And they're just, oh my God, this guy's George W. Bush. God almighty. And they're over it in the middle of the speech, as he turns on his heel. That's the wrong phrase. As he turns 180 degrees there, in the middle of the thing. And so now George W. Bush, I mean, I accuse him of murder, but I do not accuse him of insight at all. But with Barack Obama and with Donald Trump both, I know that they both know better. And Donald Trump ain't the most insightful person, maybe with a C, but not with a S. But, I know he knows better than this. Even in the 1980s, he proposed that Reagan send him to Russia to negotiate the elimination of all nuclear arms with Mikhail Gorbachev. And so this is, in fact, he's talked about before how his uncle was a scientist at MIT and had taught him all about nuclear weapons. So he knew the difference between uranium and plutonium fission and fusion and kilotons and megatons and ICBMs and the other kind and all this sort of stuff, enough to know what he was dealing with and to think that maybe this is how he could make the mark of his greatness, would be in eliminating these monstrous devices from the planet Earth. And he's the president. He could do it. He could do it. He could give a speech from the Oval Office that just says, you know what? I'm wearing a bulletproof vest because I think that my own government might kill me. And I'm not taking any limousine rides in Dallas. I promise you that. But I am meeting with the Russians and I am making peace. And American people, if you're with me, let them know. And, demand. Hey, George Bush said to the American people, hey, if you're an American patriot, then you support torture and you support this government that tortured people. Am I right, America? And Americans rallied to that. So that's all Trump has to do, is do that, only with getting rid of nukes. And he's got to know that. As dim as we all accuse him of being, he's got to know that that's what he could do, And in fact, people would make a decent argument that, but he's so hemmed in with all these accusations about Russia. That's true. But so just turn it around on them and just say, no collusion, witch hunt, no collusion, witch hunt, nuclear arms agreement. You know, you can accuse me of whatever you want, but you can't prove it because it's not true. And I'm doing this anyway. And you know what? I mean, seriously, the guy's in his 70s anyway. Go ahead and shoot me. I don't care. If I was the president, I'm in my early 40s. If I was the president right now, I would give a speech called "Go ahead and shoot me." I'm going to do the right thing anyway, and I don't even care if you can kill me. Give me a break, dude. How self-centered can you be to be the president, to know better, and then to all just do the wrong thing anyway? It's sickening.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the biggest, I guess, the shame parts is it really doesn't have to be this way, because it really seems like this is something I took from the Roger Stone interviews with Vladimir Putin. He really understands the nuclear risk, too, and what's going on here. And I think would be more than a willing negotiating partner with Donald Trump, right. Should, the U.S. pursue that with Russia.
Right. And, by the way, it's Oliver. Roger's the other Stone.
Yeah.
But no, I actually have that book, but I've never seen the videos, and I haven't even read the book yet, and I've been meaning to, but I'll tell you what, I saw a video of Ray McGovern giving a presentation to a group, and then they patched in this video, and he played this clip, and Oliver Stone is saying to Putin, listen, man, this Cold War, and this is before the whole 2016 election garbage, I think, he's saying, listen, this whole Cold War with Russia thing, you have to understand, this ain't personal. This is just about business in America. This is about welfare for arms industrialists. And they need to have an enemy so they can sell their product to the Pentagon. And so you guys fit the bill, but it's not like we're ever going to really do anything to you. And you've got to know that, right? And so Putin says, yeah, no, I do understand that. But, however, check out the position that you're putting me in. I'm the head of state here. You're going to ring my country with anti-missile missiles? I got to make better missiles. I have no choice but to take this as seriously as I can. Do you think I have a choice? I know it's a welfare program, but that doesn't negate the reality of what's happening. And so, the harder you work to contain us, the harder we have to build up our strength in reaction. And, that's one thing about Putin is he doesn't seem like much of a dissembler. He's essentially on the American political spectrum. He's essentially a conservative Christian Republican, I think. Not like an evangelical total wacko, but a conservative Christian, Republican type leader. But he always seems very serious. He's never coy. He's never, he doesn't ever seem like he's worried. Maybe this is part of because his approval rating is so high. He doesn't seem to craft his statements, to please short-term political objectives inside Russia so much when it comes to stuff like this. He's very frank about all of this. And yeah, we, to paraphrase Ron Paul, we ignore that at our own peril when he's saying in plain language exactly how he perceives the situation. But we continue to go ahead in a way that, puts us all at risk. And seriously, you know what? For people who just haven't thought that much about this or that, go look at some H-bombs on YouTube for a minute. And then if you're really into it, read Daniel Ellsberg's book, The Doomsday Machine. One anecdote from that. When he came to start studying, I forget if he was at the Pentagon or at the Rand Corporation at this moment, but one way or another, he was sent to review America's nuclear strategy in the Pacific. And essentially what he found was that if any one nuke goes off anywhere, or if a war breaks out over Berlin, for example, then the plan was to nuke every city in Russia and China. And there was no other plan. There is not a, all this stuff is worked out in advance. There's not a plan that says, well, we let General Happablatt decide what to do and, put whatever emphasis on escalation or de-escalation as he sees fit, hopefully to try to contain anything, even if it already got that far out of hand. But no, there's nothing like that. There's one integrated plan, and it's for killing everyone in Russia and China. And now Ellsberg rewrote that, but then he talks about how hard it was to get his changes implemented. And, the level of secrecy involved in all the different planning and stuff helps to create a real kind of solidification and status quo kind of inertia that's almost impossible to overcome. Because just like with any government program, you're talking about taking away these different commanders' authority to do the thing that before they were allowed to do, and now you're saying they can't. They rebel against that, it's the kind of stuff where it's at the very highest levels of the joint staff where essentially no one else is allowed to read it. Where even in the Kennedy administration, for Kennedy himself and his Secretary of Defense to even get to see these plans took severe, bureaucratic maneuvering and infighting, and essentially Ellsberg breaking the rules to let the National Security Council see the military's nuclear war plans. And ones that were just absolutely unreasonable. And here's some anecdotes. When Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense in the first Bush, in the Bush Senior administration, 1989 through 93, he was briefed on the nuke plan. And when he got to the part where they showed him dropping just hundreds, essentially, I guess, scores at least, I think hundreds of H-bombs on Moscow, all the different departments, just massively redundant targeting of every single thing to such a degree that only bureaucrats could come up with this kind of garbage. And they said that they made Dick Cheney sick, that Dick Cheney said, enough, turn this off, kind of in having a physical reaction to this. Dick Cheney said, I just can't understand why we need this level of overkill. Something very close to that. George W. Bush said the same thing when he was finally briefed on the nuclear war plans when he took office in 2001. He said, oh my God, is this necessary? What is this? This is insane. How come we hit Beijing over and over and over and over and over and over again? They're dead, man. You trying to dig to the center of the earth or something? It's nuts. And just like you would guess, if you were the meanest, drunkest libertarian, you might accuse the Navy of just trying to keep up with the Air Force. And that's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. The missileers and the flyers, the Air Force pilots and the Navy flyers, they all have their competition for who gets to hit how many targets. The Navy submariners. What do you mean the Air Force gets to hit these targets and we don't get to hit these targets? We get to hit them too. How come we're getting frozen out of this thing? In just the most self-interested, bureaucratic office politics type maneuver, right? Public choice theory at play when it comes to H-bombs. And somewhere in the back of your head, you're thinking, no, somewhere there's a wise person in charge of nuclear war policy who, is careful. It's only just that we're lucky so far. That's all. It's actually the kind of thing, it's the closest thing I've ever seen to proof of the supernatural, where you have miracle after miracle preventing nuclear war from breaking out when it seemed like every idiot monkey in America and Russia turning their keys and clicking their buttons and looking at their stupid little screens are ready to kill us all. And then for some reason, something else happens. Another computer kicks on and cancels the previous warning, or the radio static finally lightens up enough that they can hear the guy giving the all clear on the other end, or, some kind of thing where the very last second crisis is averted. But we've come that close that many times. The counts vary, but it's at least 20 times where we were absolutely within a dice roll's chance of full-scale nuclear war. In fact, Daniel Ellsberg talks about during the Cuban Missile Crisis that he thought that the chance of real nuclear war was like 1 in 100. And so he was advising the Kennedy government to stick the screws to Khrushchev and to make him concede this, and that, and all of these things. And then later he says he found out that they had all this other information, and their estimates gave it a 1 in 10% chance. Oh, and man. Ellsberg immediately took the exact opposite view. That you mean to tell me that with a 1 in 10 chance, you guys were still playing that hard of hardball? Oh my God. How irresponsible could Jack Kennedy and Bob McNamara possibly be to play the game that hard when the risks were that high. And Ellsberg had been the hawk, but he was just like, boy, was I wrong. And when I heard their take on what they thought they were dealing with at the time, then boy, was I wronger than wrong. And I was so wrong that they were wrong too, even though they were less the worse than me, he said. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I do agree. It's crazy with all the, different world leaders and like Netanyahu and Modi and whatever Pakistani generals could call in a nuclear weapon. The fact that they've never, at least since 49 there or 45, is quite amazing.
Yeah, it is.
I guess we should wrap up here, Scott. The last thing I just want to ask is I know there's a couple book projects going on with the Libertarian Institute. If you want to, I don't know how soon we are away from Will Grigg's book coming out or your book coming out now.
Real soon, on Will's. So here's the deal. Will Grigg has his last book he was putting together, with Tom Eddlem, was helping him do it, at the time that he died. And it's called No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg. And, we've got a guy who's a friend of the family and helped Will with the cover art for his last book, Liberty and Eclipse. And he is now working on the cover art. And we had a great little powwow about what we want the cover to look like, which I think people are going to really like. But the entire thing is edited. It has a beautiful and wonderful, really biography of Will, a story of Will, by Tom Eddlem is the introduction, to the thing. And Tom was his, protege essentially at the John Birch Society, back when Will was there. He left in 2006. But they had worked together there. And so Tom just wrote this really great introduction to the book. And then the book itself is just excellent. It's a really great choice of, I'm going to say like 30 or so Will Grigg essays from 2001 through 2013 or so. And I've written a very short afterword. I'm trying to think if there's maybe one or two more things I want to figure out to say in there, but essentially it's done. So we're just waiting on the cover art, and then I got to get my act together on that outro, which may already be done afterward. I'm not sure if I really need to add anything to it. I'm going to go back and look at it, but, and then I expect that art anytime now. Sorry, this is such a long answer. I expect that art anytime now, and I think that the book should be out hopefully within a matter of just a few weeks. I mean, certainly single digit weeks, but hopefully much sooner than that. And then, obviously, every bit of all of the gross proceeds, everything goes to Will Grigg's family. So, the Libertarian Institute is putting it out, but we're not taking a cut in any way. It's all going to them. And it's going to be really great. People are going to really like it. And then my book, I'm hard at work on it now. I'm going to spend the rest of the day today reading The Battle for Syria by Christopher Phillips, that Patrick Coburn says is the best single book on the Syria war. So I'm trying really hard to catch up on all the books I should have read all this time. I'm taking a ton of notes. I've got a group in the Reddit chat room who are going through their crowdsourcing and going through and listening to at least hundreds of my thousands of interviews and taking notes on best quotables and that kind of research and stuff. So, and then I actually also have another volunteer who's reading books and taking notes from some books and helping me, as a research assistant there. So I've already got the rough draft written, but I also have a ton of notes already and plus a ton more reading to do. So what is it, halfway through February? I'd like to be done. I need to really hurry and hopefully be done reading books in another 6 weeks and then get back to integrating all of my new notes into the text and improving it and then editing the hell out of it. And then, I'm trying to be realistic here, Kyle. I think, I want to really shoot for Labor Day, the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, and everybody going back to business, and the campaign season getting going and everything. And to get that out. But so the book is Afghanistan, it's the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq War I, Iraq War 1.5, the rise of Al-Qaeda. In other words, chapter 1 of Fool's Errand again, only including the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, and Iraq War I, but also all that other stuff and getting into this mess. And then Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq War II, Iraq War III, Mali, Nigeria, Niger, and the Philippines. Going to have a little bit about the Philippines in there. And just, I'm going to try to do a take on the whole damn terror war, the Sunni Shia sectarian war that George Bush started and ruined everything. So, you were there when I gave the presentation, for Thaddeus Russell's, Renegade University. So, it's the transcript of that, only with a ton more stuff added to it and then edited as hell. And then, so that's essentially what the book is going to be, my take on the whole damn terror war. And then, Sheldon is working on a book. It'll be titled almost certainly, Why Palestine Matters, based on his series that he did in the last year at the Libertarian Institute about Palestine. Such a great collection of essays that he's done there. And so we're going to put that together. And then, I hope to do another Will Grigg book about the case of Christopher Tapp, who was this poor innocent man who was framed up and prosecuted and sent to prison, who Will Grigg had done all of this incredible investigative and original reporting about. And I think the last I heard, he was getting out right when Will died. He had essentially proven his innocence. So I think we're going to try to, after my book is done, then I think that'll be the next project. And I'm leaving something out too. I think Sheldon is going to do a couple of books, but I'm also still leaving something out. There was some other book project we're doing that I can't think of at the moment because I'm an idiot. But anyway, I don't know. And then at the Libertarian Institute, more and more, or I don't know about more and more. Maybe it ebbs and flows and waxes and wanes and stuff. But we got some great writers there. So there's your great stuff every day, your news roundups and your great podcast, and of course Pete Raymond, aka Mance Raider, has his show there. And then of course there's the Liberty Weekly podcast as well, that's Keith Knight and the other guy I forgot. Sorry.
Pat McFarland.
Yes, exactly. McFarland. And which is funny because I know a skater with that name from a long time ago. But then, we got a lot of great writers there too. As you said, Adam Graham has been writing a couple of things and quite a few others. So I encourage people to check out the Libertarian Institute. We're, it's me and Sheldon Richman essentially, running the thing and trying to hold it down for radical libertarianism. So we appreciate your support.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming back on the show, Scott. I'll have you back on again sometime soon.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much for having me, Kyle. Appreciate it.